Hello and welcome. This is part 4 of my pony tractor restoration series. So at the end of the last video I took the regulator apart and I needed to buy some parts. So here they are. I ordered them on Wednesday morning. They were here Thursday morning. I ordered them from this place. This place seems to be pretty decent. They have everything I've ever looked for bearings and stuff like that, except the throwout bearing for this tractor. So anyway, I'm now going to put this back together. This is the new rear crankshaft seal. It is a 75 by 95 by 12. And the 75 by 95 is a very popular size because there was I put that into the search and all these different options came up. I mean, I could have even gotten the metal housing one like the one I took out, but it was out of stock, so I got this one. And this is just a single lip O-ring because that's what was in here before, so I'm putting the same that was in here before back. And this is also the FPM material instead of the NBR. That is apparently supposed to withstand oil and heat a little better. I don't think it's at all necessary, but I figured I might as well just spend a few extra euros and get the one that's a little better for heat and oil. This crankshaft seal is a little different than what's on other tractors, because I've seen like other tractors seem to have it split and you put it in and then have a cover that goes over it. This one's nice because it's just a regular O-ring, goes in here, and that's all. So I'm happy that I didn't have to go and try and find any weird part that doesn't exist. It's just a part that is actually a really easy to get your hands on part. So that's what I'm going to do now. And then there is a paper seal behind this. It was here somewhere, I don't know where it went, but I'm just going to cut a new one out of paper because it's kind of old and hard. So since I have it all apart, I might as well do the full job now rather than waiting and having to take it apart when it leaks in a few years. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. I have to say I like these paper joints a lot better than any of the other joints. And actually, I'd almost say that there were 3 different thicknesses of paper. There was 0.25, 0.4, and 0.7 millimeters. Rather than using cork, like even on the oil pan seal, I think I could have gotten away with just getting the 0.7 millimeter thick paper, because I think the bottom of the engine is machined well enough that you can use paper. I don't like the cork. I used cork on the engine, the oil pan, and also the what do you call it, the gas pump and the water intake and outtake. And all the seals I've made out of cork, the water and the oil leaks through them. I made a seal out of this paper that's on the underside of the transmission, right under where the PTO gearing is. So it's got oil sitting on it and it is not leaking. So I much prefer these, so far anyway. My opinion might change at some point, but these paper seals I think are a lot better. Because the other thing is you tighten these paper seals up, and I haven't gone back and checked that. It's just I've tightened it once and it seems to hold oil. Maybe I checked it once. But I mean the oil pan seal, I've gone back and tightened it like 2 or 3 times, and I've even snapped off some of the bolts. So I'm going to be replacing the bolts in the oil pan. But it's like, it still leaks. So I think this paper is a much better option. And I'm sure that the cork probably over time will harden up and it will stop leaking, but it's still kind of annoying. Like, I do all this work and I make this new seal and it leaks. So I think that the paper is probably good enough for any seal on these old tractors. I mean, obviously, if you can get a seal that is specifically made for that tractor, great. But for this tractor, the only seals I could get that were specifically made for that tractor was the one water pump seal. I needed 2 water pump seals because of the way that the, not water pump, the outtake, the top water thing on the engine. I'm not sure if you remember that, but it also has the, I suppose I could go show you, but tractor's outside. It also has the place where you bolt the oil filter on, and so you need 2 seals. I don't really understand why they did that other than the fact that it's less bolts into the head, but they leak because I made it out of the cork. Otherwise, the only seals I could get for this tractor was the head gasket, the exhaust manifold, and the rocker cover. Everything else I'm having to make, which is fine, but this paper is much better if you ask me so far anyway. And even the old seals, like this is an old paper seal, and I don't think this was leaking. Like, this is pretty dry. And the old cork seals that were on the tractor, they were all leaking. But this paper one wasn't leaking, so I'm going to be using I'm going to get the thicker paper because this is the mid-size, the 0.4. I'm going to get the 0.7 next time I do a tractor, and I'm just going to use that on everything. No more of this cork business. Here's the first one done. When you're drilling the pilot holes, a dull bit is better, and also don't go as deep as you think you need to go. There are special bits you can buy to do this job, and I would say if you've come across those, definitely get one. But otherwise, just a metal twist bit will do. I'm just using 8mm rebar to do the rivets. Okay, so this is the clutch bearing holder. That is what the clutch pedal pushes here, and this pushes the bearing in and takes the fingernails off. This is the old bearing. You can hear there's quite a bit of shakiness going on in there, and it kind of feels rough in a few spots. I mean, it's probably still usable, but I wasn't too convinced after looking at the state of the fingers. Anyway, this is the new clutch bearing. This was the last one they had in stock. And it isn't even exactly the same size. I've tried to find one exactly the same size. I even asked at 2 different dealerships. Doesn't exist. So this is the closest I could find. It is roughly the same size. It feels a lot smoother. It doesn't really have much of a jiggle to it, although it still has a little bit. Anyway, the thing with this one is it's a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take this apart, take this piece to a machine shop, and get it built up to hold this. So I think that's doable. Anyway, I'm going to take this apart. So that was 40 bucks or something. It's pretty expensive bearing, but throwout bearings seem to normally be like 100 bucks anyway, so. But yeah, I've tried to find one exactly like this, and there's even a number on the back. It's made in France, B18 SNR 7844. That number doesn't mean anything apparently. Anyway, over here is the clutch. So that's the flywheel, and it is really good condition. I can't even feel the only difference between where the clutch has been riding and the edge is that the edge is rusty and that is smooth. There is no lip there. So I'm going to clean all this up with brake part cleaner. The actual clutch plate, again, it's in good condition. I would say that that is a little worn, but it's still certainly usable. Here's the pressure plate. Same deal, there is a little bit of wear right there, but hardly any. And the biggest wear, as you can see, well, let's bring this into the light. You can see where that bearing's been wearing away at these fingers, so that what makes me think that this has not been spinning properly. And although there isn't any noticeable wear on this is stainless steel, whereas this is either, I don't think this is stainless steel. It would be like something a little less smooth, so. And also, a few clips from when I was changing those brakes might be missing because this camera has started doing, or not the camera, but the memory card has started corrupting files on me. So if there's any key moments or anything that you think is missing from this project, it's because I've lost the files. So this is the other brake band. I'm trying to figure out how to get it in because it has this bolt welded on the end, and that's not going to really fit, so I'm going to have to figure something out. Anyway, that's what I'll be doing after I figure out the clutch bearing. I torqued those bolts in the center down to 2.8 meter kilos. It's set in the manual to only go to 2, but the torque wrench I have only goes as low as 2.8, and that is fine for 8 mil bolts. So I'm now putting the pressure plate on. Now ideally you have a tool or the drive shaft to line it up with the bearing in the back of the crank, but the drive shaft doesn't come out without splitting the tractor, so I'm going to line it up best I can, and hopefully it'll slide together. And then before I start the engine, I'll put the clutch in and turn it or rotate it a few times, and that should line it up perfectly, because there is a little bit of play in the drive shaft because of the way it's coupled to the front of the transmission. So it will be fine. And if it really is off, I'll just have to loosen the bolts and move it. But doing that is going to be a lot easier than getting the drive shaft out. But if you're a tractor, you can get the drive shaft out. That is how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to push it through the back of the clutch plate here into the bearing, and then tighten your pressure plate on. But like I said, I don't have the option of doing that. So as you know, I put the final drives on before I put the brakes on, because of the fact that I didn't have the pads yet. So that is fine. The other side, yeah, it is a bit tricky to get it on. The easiest way is to take this off and feed it through from this side. But this pin is seized in here, so there's no way I'm getting it out, because like there's nowhere to really get a good swing at it with a hammer. So I'm just gonna cut it, drill it out, and put this new pin in, which is probably not a bad idea anyway. And that, because on the other end, as you can see, we have this 10mm bent bolt that's just been welded on. That is not how it's supposed to be. The other side had a nice little clamp that came through, and then the bolt slid through and the head got stuck on the clamp. That made it really easy, because I just fed that around the brake drum and it was fine. But this one, it's got this, and I don't really want to mess with this, because it also appears to be a different thread pattern than standard M10. And this is not coming out, so I'm just going to cut it, drill it, and be done with it. So here's the new clutch throwout bearing. So I've waited about 9 weeks to get to this point. So the reason why it took so long is because the old bearing that was on here does not exist. I asked at 2 different tractor dealerships and I looked online, but I could not find it. So I found this one, which is roughly the same size. It's a little bit bigger on the inside, a little bit bigger on the outside. It's the same thickness. And the most important thing is that this is a cage bearing, because there were lots of other throwout bearings, or not throwout bearings, but bearings like this that were 3 parts. You had the back, the rollers, and the front. But that obviously is not going to work for me because it's only connected at the back and the front's just floating until you disengage the clutch. So I ordered this and I said, well, okay, I need to get this part a little bit bigger to hold it on the inside. So luckily it came out and it's just this barrel. So I have a friend who also does mechanics. He's not a professional mechanic, but he works on his vans and stuff. So I asked him, do you know anybody who has a lathe? And he said, well, there's this one guy. So he took this part to him, and that guy said, no, I can't do it. So, but I know who can do it. So there was a guy about 45 minutes away who had a big machine shop. So he took it there, and so that guy machined it, but he machined it to fit this side, not this side. So they are different diameters by about 0.3 millimeter or something like that. So obviously that was not going to work. So I had to take it back and then get it machined again. And he did a much better job this time. You can see that that little ring around the edge is all the same thickness now, whereas before it was kind of odd shaped. So he machined it to down or replace this ring, I think, and now it fits. So that is good. But this is kind of a lesson to me that, like, when you have repairs like this, just use it as a good excuse to buy the proper tools, because I want a lathe anyway, and they were a little bit expensive. I mean, the smallest lathe that actually looked like it might work, they were about 700 to 1,000 euros. I saw a perfect lathe, like one that would be ideal to have not far from here, but it was 2,300 bucks. So I mean, that seemed like a lot of money, but on the other hand, by not buying a lathe, I've had to wait like an extra 5 or 6 weeks to get this part machined. I had to, well, not me, my dad had to drive out to this place 45 minutes away twice, and my friend had to drive out there 45 minutes away twice, and it was 90 euros in machining. So if I just bought a lathe, yeah, I would have only saved about 170, maybe 180 euros, because machining and also diesel to go there 4 times. So yeah, a few more jobs like this and that lathe would be paid for. So it's a lesson to me that sometimes just buy your own tools, because then you have it, and whenever you need it, you can use it. But anyway, it's done now, and I mean, 200 bucks for a throwout bearing is a little bit expensive, because I was looking at throwout bearings for other tractors, and they started at 100 bucks, so it's not that bad. And I mean, obviously I had no choice, there was no other option. So that's the story behind this. Now I'm gonna go put it on the tractor, because even though it's late, I'd like to get this tractor up and running again, because we need it to do firewood. So after getting the tractor all back together the other day, probably 2 weeks ago now, I tried to get it running, and it just wouldn't start on the 6 volt. Like, it would turn once around and then it would pause, and turn again and then it would pause. So that didn't work. I hooked the 12 volt battery up, and it started right up, but it kept stalling. That's a different story. I think that it just needs to be run for a while because there might be gunk in the carburetor or something, or the carburetor needs to be tuned. But whatever, that's for another day. But so I kept on trying to restart it, but the starter got like it wanted to turn less and less, and it was working fine on the 12 volt, and then it just suddenly quit. Like, I hooked the battery up, pulled the lever, absolutely nothing. So tried that a few times, nothing worked. I even got a crank to start it by hand. I think that would work, but because the tractor's not running very well at the moment, I really think the carburetor or the timing, the distributor that distributes the electricity to the spark plugs might need to be tuned. But whatever, that's for another day. So it wouldn't start on the hand crank, and I kind of got annoyed with it. So I took the starter motor off, which I probably should have done first, and I took it all apart. It's not that hard to take apart. You just take off these two bolts at the back here, and the whole thing comes apart. I probably should have filmed it, but I really thought that this starter motor was rubbish. But I noticed that the positive brush, like when I took the motor out, I noticed that the negative brush went in like they normally do when you take the center of the rotor out, but the positive brush was stuck. So I worked it out with worked it back and forth with a screwdriver, sanded the sides a little bit. I sanded the rotor, and I put it back together, and now it works. It makes sparks, but it works. And I noticed that the positive brush did have 3 or 4 big cracks in it. So we need to get new brushes for this. So that's what I'm going to do now. Hopefully they aren't too hard to find. So it's a few days later. I got new brushes. Old stock. Exactly the part I need. These are the same brushes as the old ones were. So I'm going to swap them out. Swapping them out should be a 2-minute job, but the positive is soldered in. So I'm gonna have to melt the solder and re-solder it, but that's fine. So I'm gonna put this back together, and hopefully now I can start the tractor. So I had it running yesterday, but today I'm actually gonna get it running and moving, hopefully. So it's cold out this morning, so I filled the radiator with hot water, and I have a 12 volt battery just so I have a better chance of getting it started. So, as you saw, I got it running yesterday. Ran very well, I think. There's the slightest knocking coming from the engine, but that might very well... It sounds like it's coming out of the exhaust manifold, but it's not new. It was there before, so it should be fine. So I took it down the street and back. Ran very well. It actually seemed like it had a little more power. The only thing is that my seals in there, don't know if you remember those, they started leaking, and I had oil. Surprisingly, no oil came out on the street, but as soon as I pulled in the driveway and stopped, like, oil poured out of the tires. I think it's because as I was driving, the oil was all the force of the tires turning was sticking the oil in here. But anyway, that's just a simple seal that's easy to fix. So the starter motor, as you know, I replaced the brushes. I did not film the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th time that I took that starter motor off and resoldered the brushes. Basically, the reason why it was a problem in the first place is because the positive brush needs to be soldered, and I'm not that good at soldering. And originally it was crimped. There was the copper wire in the motor was crimped around the copper wire of the brush, and then it was soldered. I skipped that step and just tried to solder it, just because it was very hard to work in there. That was a bad idea. So finally, this time I crimped it and I soldered it, and I think it's good now. An interesting thing that I noticed is I was using electronic solder, like the solder you'd use for like keyboards and electrical wires and stuff like that. But I think that stuff is not strong enough, because I did a little test on just some spare copper using plumbing solder and using the electronic solder, and I was able to break the wires using the electronic solder apart a lot easier. So I'm definitely using plumbing solder from now on. I don't see any reason to use electronic solder. It conducts electricity the same way. The regulator the regulator works very well. I think it works better than it did before. It just responds faster, and I'll have to tighten that belt after we run it for a while and get rid of this business. The generator works, charges the battery. Unfortunately, I do think that this starter motor is a 12 volt, because it will not turn over on the 6 volt anymore. It used to start on the 6 volt, and it ran in this, like when I was bench testing it after the repair, it ran fine on the 6 volt, but it just doesn't want to run on the 6 volt now for whatever reason. So I am looking for a new starter motor for this that is a 6 volt, and this one will just go on the shelf when I find that. The clutch, definitely better, still grinds a little bit. I'm going to try adjusting it, but now the amount of grinding is acceptable. So for now, I think I'm going to call it fixed, because I don't really feel like tearing into the transmission or taking the engine out again. That can kind of be something for another day. So before, as I said back when I was fixing the starter motor, it wouldn't run for whatever reason, and I thought perhaps it might be the spark plug cables, because the old ones were very hard and stiff. So I replaced them. I'm not sure that was the problem. These spark plug cables are definitely a decent upgrade. They're nice and malleable, and they're stuck on the plugs well, whereas the old ones were kind of just sitting there. So that was a valuable upgrade. I then thought that it might be the distributor cap or the rotor cap inside here. I couldn't find either of those parts. Well, I found a rotor cap for inside, but it was not, it wasn't the right one, and I did not find the distributor cap that was the right one. However, I did adjust the points, because the points were not opening and closing as the engine spun. So I adjusted that, and it works now. So that was the problem, was the points were badly adjusted. So that's pretty much everything that I have to say right now. Yeah, obviously I have a few paint touch-ups, and also I have lights. I have indicator lights, tail lights, and then last night I ordered a new headlight for here, and the things that make the indicator lights blink. So that is going to be the next video. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to put the hitch back on, get the lights working. I might be lucky enough to find a new starter motor and get that working. Otherwise, in the meantime, we kind of have to start it on a 12 volt and then switch it to the 6 volt to run it, because, well, I guess it can run without a battery, but I'd just rather have a battery in it. But anyway, yeah, the carburetor seems to be working fine. I thought that might be a problem, but it seems that the point, adjusting the point, was what fixed it. This is an oil bath air filter, so the air comes down. There's oil down here, gets sucked through the oil. It's just engine oil. and then it goes through a screen in here, and then it goes over to the carburetor. So this type of filter is a pretty handy type, especially on these older machines, because you don't really ever have to replace the filter. You just need to refill the oil, because the oil is what filters. The screen is really just to keep any big particles from going through. However, I'm kind of toying with the idea of putting a more modern paper filter on here. If any of you know about that kind of stuff or have experience, leave it down in the comments. Not something I'm going to do right away, but I'm kind of just thinking about putting a paper filter on here, because although the oil bath air filter is really good and really easy to keep clean, you do have to haul around oil, and you do have to have jars to pour dirty oil into. So a paper filter would just be a little more easy, especially if I was going to be like making hay or baling straw or something with this tractor, which is possible. It's a possible job that it's going to do. So for pulling firewood in the winter, it doesn't matter, but let me know what you think. So in the manual it says you want to have about 2, whatever unit that is, of oil pressure. And when this starts up, you get about 2 to 3, but once it gets to this operating temperature, it drops to like almost, like maybe less than 1, like the needles barely move. So I'd be kind of curious to know if like that's just a normal thing, or if it means that the oil pump needs to be adjusted or something. I do think I saw something in the manual about adjusting the oil pump. But anyway, I'm kind of curious about that. It is definitely pumping oil because, well, first off, it leaks. That's basically how I know it's pumping oil. But yeah, so the oil comes up there, and this is the line that goes to the pressure gauge, and then that it goes up to here, and then it goes back down here. Interestingly, this filter is not, as far as I know, is not between the oil pump and the actual moving parts. All this does, this line here that returns, it just dumps it back in down there, and it just dumps over the camshaft and into the crankcase. So yeah, it's always been like that. It's never really built much oil pressure. I'd say it's been about the same since we got it. But again, if you know about this kind of stuff, just let me know in the comments. I'm curious to know if like that's normal, or if it's something that needs to be looked at right away. Anyway, now to start her up and play with the clutch. Started her about 5 minutes ago. Oil pressure on getting at idling speed. So this is the clutch issue I've been talking about. We're idling with the clutch in. Better than it was, but it's still grinding. So then you have to let the clutch out. Clutch in, stop. Then if I want to change gears like this, no noise. Come on. Fine. So that's what I mean. When you take the clutch out, put it in. Grinds a little bit, but it's sure better. A little bit. See? So, anybody who knows anything about that, let me know down in the comments. Because it's not having any problem grabbing. Like once you get the clutch engaged, it doesn't slip. It is only when you go to engage the gear that it grinds a little. It's definitely better with that new blowout bearing, but it's still grinding. The next video I'm going to put the hitch back on, do the lights, all of that business, and maybe I'll even try and get some footage of it working in the forest. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.